Good afternoon, everyone. It's Wednesday, it's 4 o'clock, so it must be time for me to talk to another old civilian about their lives. And today's guest is Iain Angus, who left Quegs in 1998. I'm just going to invite him. Join us very soon. So yeah, Iain left Quegs in 1998 and has had a 20-plus year career so far, which he's going to tell us all about, in the video game industry. He's currently, here he is, in fact.
Camera sorted out. There we go.
There
Hello.
we are. Fantastic. That was smooth. Excellent. I was just about to say, Iain is a senior producer at Curve Games, which we'll get into explain what he does in a moment. And he has worked for some of the big names in the industry. And we'll get into tell us all about what he's done. But perhaps we'll start, Iain, with a quick, or not even that quick, take as long as you like, quick resume of your time at Quegs, from Quegs to how you've got here, and then we'll unpack some of that, if that's okay, looking at things in some detail. So, over to you.
Sure. Yes. Good to see you, by the way.
Great to see you. Really grateful you've joined us this afternoon.
No problem at all. Yes, I started in the Quegs Junior School in 1987. Had the full experience right from the beginning all the way through to sixth form, leaving in 1998. I left with 4 A-levels in maths, physics, chemistry, and general studies. I remember when a certain Mr. Fitzsimons started there. I think that was 93 or thereabouts. Yes,
very good.
yes.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Haven't aged a day since then, of course. Anyway, yes. So from Quegs, I went to study computing. I did a master's degree for 4 years at Imperial College because I wanted to program computers. And my first job after that was at a games company called Rare, which didn't really work out. I was only there for a couple of months. And I got another job straight after that at Criterion Games, which some people have heard of. They were bought by Electronic Arts when I was there, which most people have heard of, and I worked there for nearly 9 years. Kind of worked my way up through the programming ranks. I worked on Burnout 2, Burnout 3, Burnout Revenge, there's a theme here, Burnout Paradise. Then I moved into a different role. So I was programming computers, and I changed to doing game design, which maybe we could get into what those things mean. I worked as a game designer on Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. Then I quit the games industry for a year or so, making websites as a project manager, then got back in, worked for Konami on Pro Evolution Soccer. It's Pro Evolution Soccer 2014, 15, and 16. That place shut down. I went to Lionhead Studios after that, which is owned by Microsoft, and it's an Xbox first-party studio. I worked on Fable Legends. My job title there was technical program manager, but it's kind of more of a management side thing. That only lasted 1 year because the whole studio was shut down. 200 people were made redundant, including me, and I went to Creative Assembly after that, which is owned by Sega, which most people have heard of. I was a level designer on Halo Wars 2, and then went back to production, which is management, on a mobile kind of experimental title that didn't come out for a few years, and then on the Total War Warhammer series, I worked on that. And that took me up to the beginning of this year, where I left there after just over 5 years, and now I'm working for a publisher, Curve Games, which you mentioned earlier, and a slightly different dynamic, but I'm now working with external companies, small independent studios in Europe, on 3 different games, looking after them to make sure they get released on time and that they're good and people buy them. So that's the quick version. Quite a few twists and turns on the way, but that's what I've been up to.
Brilliant. So you set off, you said you planned to do computing. Where did that interest come from? Was that born in school? Because probably in the 90s, the internet was just a new thing. Email was beginning. Where did that interest originally start? Was that at school or in your own time? Or
it was probably, in my own time. There were computers at school, but there was just one room where computers were. And you went there, and I didn't really engage. Yeah, it's definitely at home, largely through playing games, but also doing other stuff on computers. I was one of the, I think, first boys in the school to be on the internet and to have an email address. I remember having to find out someone else I could email to test it worked. And there was a guy I didn't particularly get on with in my year, but his dad was into computers. So I emailed this guy's dad saying, did this work? This was 95, 96 sort of time. So yeah, it was more of a sort of hobby outside of school.
And when you were studying computing, was it particularly the game industry you thought you'd go into, or did that come about by chance, or how was that journey begun? Because obviously you've stayed in the industry in different guises, which we'll explore in a minute. But how did you get started?
It wasn't really my intention at all, because I didn't even know that the games industry kind of existed. I played lots of games, but I didn't kind of twig that people must work on these things. You know, I went to university with a sort of a plan. I knew computers were, you know, especially in the 90s, they were new, and not everyone had one. And you know, some people said, "Oh, you know, you're a bit of a geek. What are you messing around with computers for? They're a waste of time." And I was thinking, oh, I think this, you know, I think these are going to be popular in the future. And it turns out I was right.
Absolutely.
But yeah, my only plan was to sort of do something with computers, program. Didn't really know what that meant, but that was enough to get me into university. Again, I wanted to do that at the best university I could, and I didn't get into Oxford, so the next one on the league tables was Imperial, so I went there. But I thought about it a bit more, I'd maybe have gone to a place that, you know, suited me better, because it was kind of inner city and very kind of theoretical rather than practical. And you know, I still managed to do it and complete the course, but you know, I thought I could have a go again. Maybe I'd done something a bit differently. But I went to university 98, graduated in 2002. There was the dot-com crash around 2000, 2001. A lot of experienced software developers were out of a job and competing for the same jobs that I was going for. And yeah, the sort of, you know, writing software code jobs I thought I'd have leaving university just weren't there. And I borrowed a games magazine from my university flatmate, and in the back they had job adverts. So I applied to one of those almost on a whim and got it. Went for an interview and in a place in a room with posters of all sorts of games. So this is a bit different. And yeah, so yeah, it was kind of necessity at the time, but then I kind of stuck to it. And yeah, stayed in, like you said.
And you said the first job was a couple of months, then you moved, and you were a programmer at that point. So could you describe sort of, you know, what did you know when you went in, and how quickly did you have to learn things, and how much did it evolve? What does a games programmer do? We all know what computer games are, but actually creating them, I'm not sure. I know an awful lot about that, and maybe others who are watching don't either. So what's involved?
Yeah, it's a good question, because, well, the way I like to put it is lots of people have an idea of, like, say, how films are made. Like you get somebody writes a script, and then some actors read out the scripts, and someone points a camera at them, and you have this idea of you know how films are made, and it's, you know, a bit of a simplification, but at least you've got a starting point. But for games, no, that sort of model in people's heads doesn't exist. So it's kind of hard to explain, because it's lots of different things coming together. There's art, but it's very sort of technical computer art that could be viewed in all sorts of different ways depending on how the player plays the game. Designed people deciding what it is that makes this piece of software a game and fun, rather than just you know, like productivity software that you use because you have to, not because you want to. And coders who make everything happen, because in a game, unlike a film, everything is artificial. Everything has to be created. Like you even have to, you know, create gravity and light, because they don't exist when you're making a film. Those things there already. Yeah. And so, game creation is drawing together all these sort of creative and technical things, which is, you know, why it's quite complicated and chaotic a lot of the time. And as a programmer, you know, I'd be usually working with a designer, and the designer would say, you know, I want it to do this, and I'd write some code to make the character. It was racing games, car driving, you know, I want the car to explode over here, or behave in this particular way, and I'd write code to fulfill that. And usually it's a very iterative process. You do something, you play it, decide this isn't that fun, and tweak it and adjust and go again. Wow. Yeah.
So that was the beginning, and then I think but I might not use the right terms here, but what did you go on to next? You talked about more the design side, I think. Game design.
Oh, we didn't design. There are various different specialisms of programming. Some are very low level, deciding what the game the kind of foundations of the tech that everything else is built on. But what I did was high level. It was close to, like I said, working with designers, and I, talk to them every day, and I've decided that, I could do that job. I understand enough about what they do to do it myself. And also, even though I spent 4 years at university learning how to code, I was kind of getting a bit bored with it, because when you're hands-on doing something, all you can contribute is the code you write, and that's limited by how fast you can type and how quickly you can create things kind of manually. But when you're telling other people what to do, you can get a lot more done, because the boring implementation part is done by all these other people. And I started to resent being told what to do all the time by people I thought I could do their job better, and so after quite a lot of complaining, and some key people left, which opened up a gap and said, I could do this. And I worked the game design next, which was a lot more fun.
And presumably that was a bit more senior. You're working with groups of people, teams of people. That's promotion, and then how does that, or was it not? Was it just a different role?
It was moving sideways, but sort of diagonally downwards. The problem I had was that programmers tended to be paid more than designers, because they typically have a better more advanced education in order to be a programmer. You go to university, study computing, and whereas designers, everyone thinks they're a designer. There's no sort of academic side to it. Some people just seem to be good at it, but others aren't, and therefore, and there's a huge demand because lots of people want to do it, and therefore the supply and demand means that you get paid less. So I moved into a job where, because I was at the same company, they didn't cut my pay, but it was kind of frozen for a while. I kind of effectively went backwards a bit, but it was worth it to move into something that I enjoyed doing, because a theme of all the stuff I've done over the years is, if I'm not enjoying it, if I'm not into it, then I'm not very motivated to spend all my working time doing it, and also don't do as good a job as if I'm not into it. So even though it's a slight step down, it was worth doing. And
from there, you obviously grown experience, worked on different games. You mentioned producer, and that's linked to management. So how does that differ? Again, it's another aspect of how this process works. Where does a producer come into there? Which is what you do now, or continue to do.
The games industry is very inconsistent, and the word producer means vastly different things at different companies. Some companies they even split the role in two. There's a dev manager who does the kind of more project management style resource allocation, prioritization, scheduling, like you go over here, do that, you go over there, do that. Whereas the producer sees the product side and what it is, and more of a kind of a salesman for it, and telling people why it's great. And whereas often those two are kind of squished together. And also it depends on what you are and where you're doing it, and also the phases of development at the beginning, where people are just coming up with what you're going to make next. Everything's quite free form and open to ideas, but then you've got to make it, and towards the end it's just get it out, do what we do. So producer is largely what in other fields would be called project management. We have a game as a big project, and you have to make sure that it's delivered on time, on budget, and so on. But there's a slight creative element too, where you're talking about what it is rather than how you're making it.
Okay, that's really interesting. So it's project management and leadership, and you're working with a team or multiple teams to deliver. And I think you said to me some of your games have won awards and others never got made. What makes the difference, or is it a bit random? What's made the difference in some of yours?
It's difficult to tell. If you knew it, a consistent answer to that question, you'd probably be very successful.
Indeed, yeah.
Some go to market, and it's the level of success really is measured by the number of people that buy it, play the game, and that's how much money you make at the end of the day. Awards are a bit more subjective. I'm not really sure how they're decided. So Burnout 3 won 3 BAFTA awards, and I know Need for Speed Hot Pursuit won 1. So I like to joke that I've either won 5 or 6 BAFTAs, but you tend to lose count after the first 4. Although it wasn't just me winning those, it was I was on teams of up to 150 people, and I did my bit and everyone else did theirs.
Well, it's still
it's
pretty cool to say you've won BAFTAs, though. That's been and contributed. That's nice.
uh,
And those are successful
not
games
one
as well.
place though. Sorry. Yeah.
Those,
Sorry, Karen.
so we've got a slight delay. Those are successful games as well, clearly, that have gone on to. I suppose it's like any
Yes.
product. Any product that you make and sell, there is an element of, will people like it? How much of the business is researching that, trying to find out what the next hole is? Is that part of it, or?
Yes, I see that more these days now working for a publisher, because there's lots of sort of market analysis and forecasting that I see, and there's people that do this. They're trying to predict, this game, what's it going to sell, if we brought it onto PlayStation and Xbox instead of just PC, is that worth it? That kind of thing. That's all very interesting. And they've got that down to a bit of a science, and it's usually pretty good. But that's sort of based on what's gone before. Doing something entirely new and innovative, like say years ago, Minecraft came out of nowhere, and that was completely new and fresh. Was also, and Microsoft bought it for $100 million or something like that. And predicting entirely new things is very hard, and lots of people try, and a few succeed, and they're very successful. So, yeah.
And you pick out a highlight for us of your career so far? What's something you're very proud of, or a very fond memory?
Yeah, just seeing people play the games. I mean, I worked on Halo Wars, and my name was 5th on the credits of a Halo game. And on Burnout Paradise, there was, on the soundtrack was the Ramones. So I've been on the same credits list as the Ramones, which probably most of the boys watching might not know or care about, but people of a certain age think that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool, yeah.
A small punk band. So yeah, and being able to walk into any high streets when we used to have high streets and see something I'd worked on the shelf. You think I made that. I remember, I think it was the first game I worked on. Burnout 2 came out. I went to the shop to see it, and there's a stand of them there, and some young child came, looked at it, picked one up, and threw it on the floor and walked off. I was like, okay, made it now. But and then you meet people that you say what you do, and you worked on a game, and they've played it, and they're all enthusiastic about it.
That's brilliant.
So doing something that's in the public eye, and even though you're kind of anonymous in that, is still quite rewarding when you find out.
I can see that, absolutely. And what about some of the challenges you faced? Tell us. You mentioned, I think earlier, about being made redundant. That must be easy. Go on, talk to us a bit about that, because how do you bounce back from something like that? Where do you take stock, and what happened next?
The games industry is quite chaotic. Studios can shut. Games can be not successful, like we were talking about minutes ago. Work on a game, and either it comes out and not as many people buy it as you think you do, or the people paying for it, the parent company or whatever, in the case of Lionhead, look at it and think, actually, this is not what we want. We don't think this is going to go or do what we want it to do, and therefore the studio shut down. And when Lionhead shut, it came as a shock. We didn't expect it at all. So all marched into the company cafeteria, and big American guy says, everyone pick up a letter, and you're out of a job. How do you bounce back from that? It's you got to anticipate it. It's it's good to have some savings to fall back on if you find yourself a bit. But it's just understanding your industry, what your options are, how you can what you need. Which in my case, I needed another job. I had lots of contacts, because at that stage I've been in the industry for more than 10 years, and I knew all of the studios nearby and what they'd be looking for. And Creative Assembly was in a kind of the next town about 10 miles away, and it was one I'd had my eye on for a while. But so I had an awareness already of what was out there, and got a new job. But mentioned some other challenges as well, especially early on. The games industry's notorious for long hours, and I did insane hours on the early Burnout games, like beyond midnight, working weekends, all that sort of stuff. I mean, once I even kind of lost consciousness and headbutted the keyboard as I was writing code, and and stuff. And and that's really tricky, and causes a lot of friction, as you might imagine. You nearly has an impact on your life outside of work, which is something you really want to avoid. I mean, in my early to mid 20s, that's more manageable. But when you get older, you have kids these days, and working late and not seeing them is much more of a big deal than it would have been earlier. But yeah.
And is that the nature of the is that expected in the nature of the business, that you get the thing done? Is that kind of part of being a game designer, or is it just on particular projects you might be up against a deadline, or you just get drawn in and you want to finish it? What sort of things, or is it all of the above? I don't know.
It varies. It is all of the above. It is a hot topic in the industry. It's something that's talked about a lot. Crunch time, especially big companies that are multinational corporations expecting their staff to work long hours, seen as unreasonable because they're paying and not necessarily seeing the benefits of all their work. There are lots of startup studios where even 2 or 3 people get together and want to make a game, and it's all on them. And so they often work really hard because they don't have a choice and they don't have the thing to fall back on. So it depends on the circumstance. Sometimes when there's a milestone or a deadline, the game's got to be out by Christmas. We've got to sort it out. But people have done studies that say, especially over a long period, working extra hours doesn't actually benefit productivity because people are tired. The work's very technical and detailed, and mistakes are made. So it's counterproductive in the long run.
And you mentioned you're producer for indie games at the moment, sort of independent.
Yes.
So when are they due out soon? That's what you're working on at the moment. What's the sort of time frame for that? What's next for you, I suppose, looking to the immediate future?
Well, it's a continual conveyor belt of new games. There's one that's out already, and we're working on a DLC. It's called downloadable content, an expansion for it. It's one that's coming out later in the year. One's coming out in a couple of years. It's when they're out, there'll be another one. They'll come along. That's the nature of this job, and I'm still fairly new to it. I've only been doing stuff since the start of the year, and really enjoying it. It's quite a different change from being in a development team, just working on one game, working to one. And so definitely going to stick to this.
That's good.
And long term, it'd be quite cool to maybe even start my own independent thing up. Although I'm not sure I'm ever going to be in the right situation to do that, but it's a dream.
But your experience of the industry and the different aspects that you've looked at it leads you to think, oh, well, I could. I mean, you mentioned that earlier. You thought I could do that better. That's something that you've got an eye on as well, which is really interesting.
Yeah, although now I know more about how it works, I can see the problems as well. If you're sort of young and naive and just jump into it, but then maybe that's what you need to do just to get going. But now I know what's going to be difficult, and the money side of things is always a challenge.
Of course, for everyone indeed. That's absolutely fascinating insight into the industry. Thank you. Can we look back a bit, and we'll look back to your time at school? And are there any moments, any particular influential moments or memorable moments that when you think back of school that jump to mind immediately? What sort of memories of school have you got that you might share with us, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, I did all sorts of different things at school. I was into music and
were you in the swing band back in the day? Have I got that right?
And I was a violinist, so I was in there were lots of orchestra groups, that kind of thing, and you could play solo as well. So performing to a packed QE hall, on my own, playing the violin, it's quite a nerve-wracking experience. I mean, Quegs provides lots of opportunities to embarrass yourself on a vast scale. I took full advantage of those, but and also I did an assembly once. I'd written something and read it out to all the boys when I was in lower sixth form, and and going through that, it's totally eradicated any fear of public speaking I've got now, because it's the sort of thing where if you do it a lot, you get better at it and get more confident. So having been through that experience, that's very useful to me to this day, talking to lots of people. I also enjoyed the sort of outdoors pursuit stuff. I think that's probably where we interacted the most. I think you always roped into driving the minibus and stuff like that.
Absolutely. The old DV up to Camp Windermere back in the day.
That's right. Yeah, did DV, and as in the cross country team, which most Saturdays we'd be off to some different part of north of England and running, and then having a bit of freedom. And didn't get much freedom at school or at home, so it was great to sort of get out and go to different places and run around a bit. That was great. And then ultimately, as I left that summer, did the World Challenge expedition to Bolivia for 4 weeks, which yeah, that was really eye-opening, going to a completely different part of the world where, you know, a very poor country, one of the poorest in the world, and, you know, travel around and do stuff. And yeah,
Isn't that the
yeah.
one where the coach? Isn't that the one where the coach comes?
Yes,
Go on. Oh God.
yes. I've still got scars on the side of my hand when I put my hand through the window and the coach rolled on its side in the sort of in the Andes in the sort of desert plain. Yeah, so that was a feature of the exhibition. It didn't, you know, slow us down too much. A few days kind of getting better. I mean, yeah, a couple of broken bones, but nothing too serious. But we managed to stay out there, coming home to. But yeah, very interesting experience. I recommend that. You know, travel different parts of the world to anyone. Yeah, I really found that valuable.
And that was with Mr. Tingle, I think. Was he?
Yes.
The expedition. Have you got fond memories of any of the teachers that were instrumental and influential in your development at school? Who can you remember?
Yes. Oh, there's so many. It's a difficult question to answer because you mentioned some, and then others might watch this. Why didn't you mention? But yes, of course, yeah. Mr. Reese, who did the cross country, at the time, yeah, he had to put up with a lot. And then, yeah, still do a lot of sports, still play football outside of school, and so, yeah, Mr. Barker, Mr. Sholver, Mr. Pickerskill, who did PE when I was there. You know, it's that. Yeah, the things they taught me about sport and fitness is still kind of applying, still useful. And then, yeah, when I was in sixth form, my form teacher was Mr. Spencer, who I didn't really know through school because he never taught me, but he was form teacher in sixth form. And yeah, I felt that he kind of understood me a bit more than most of the other teachers, and kind of gave me, you know, advice, especially to do with, you know, applying to university and leaving, that might not have got elsewhere. So yeah, a lot of respect from Mr. Spencer. Yeah, haven't mentioned any teachers that actually taught me anything or taught me any lessons. But I got good exam results, so I think they've had their reward that way.
There must have been some input, and you obviously worked hard. I remember you were a successful cross country runner as well. That's my memory. I'm sure
yeah, I wasn't the best, but I always got out there, always finished.
Yeah, it's a long time ago now, but that's my memory anyway, so I'll stick to it. Thinking about our audience today, obviously people are tuning in. I can see lots of them. It's one of the features of this. The names fly up the screen. It's great. What advice might you have if someone says, "Oh, I want to do that. I want to be a game developer." What particular things should they be thinking about if they're still at school? If that's something that they would be interested in, what advice do you have?
Yes, I'm trying to think. Well, first of all, yeah, the sorts of things you study are not tend to be, yeah, the games industry is a very skills oriented thing. You have to have specific skills which you can't necessarily learn at school. Do stuff outside school, you know, there's lots of free software you can use and play around to get skills. But obviously grounding in the basic academics. Maths is the big one, as I'm sure you'd love to hear me say that, yeah, not just programming in particular, but even art in games is very technical and maths based. So having understanding that, and management as well, numbers, budgets, you know, statistics, and a lot of modern games do analysis of the players and their behavior, and we get all kinds of statistics about, you know, people have got to the end of level 3 but not level 4, and you see graphs of all these things, and being able to process large amounts of statistics, and which can often be very misleading because they might drive you to make changes to the game that aren't necessarily beneficial. So yeah, understanding maths is very good, and, you know, basic communication skills, writing, English, yeah, that's useful in pretty much everywhere. But advice for getting into the industry, it is quite hard because there aren't that kind of entry graduate level jobs. It's because it's a competitive industry, so the companies tend to be short-sighted, that they want to get to the end of their project and sell it and make money and carry on to the next one. And there isn't really too much focus on developing people for future projects because the future's, you know, a bit too far off. But it is possible to get in, otherwise nobody would do it. But everyone, you know, I know in the games industry has got a different origin story about how they got there. Like, you know, someone was playing in a band and the drummer was doing some QA testing for a studio and got someone a job, that kind of thing. When, you know, so yeah, but what can you do in that situation is just, you know, work on your skills, be persistent, try everything until something will eventually work. Yeah.
Sure. And are you in a position where...
Sorry, if people have specific questions, I'm sure they could get them to me if you can find an appropriate route to do that.
Really kind, thank you. Yes, we'll make contact details available to anyone who wants to ask more, particularly you know, particularly more specific things about if they've got ideas about how they want to do it. That's really kind of you. Thank you. And if you're the role you're in now, do you get to hire and fire? Are you looking for people to put into your teams? Is that part of what you do, or have you ever done that? What sort of things do you look for in a candidate? Yeah,
I've done lots of hiring at the moment. The previous job did probably more and did hire well, graduates, entry level roles. Yeah, again, like I said, it's very skills oriented. You have to have the specific skills to be able to do the thing that you need to do when you're on a team of, you know, can be between, you know, 500 or 800 people in the biggest case of the team. So you've got your bit to do, and you need to have the skills in order to do that, and they vary depending on what the role is. You mentioned some of the different types of roles earlier. Then, you know, are you able to present it well? Most, you know, early game developers have their own little website where they put all their work on and saying, you know, this is what I've done, this is what I've made, and it's always good to see that. Then in interviews, when you know, you talk to people, a lot of interviewers aren't that good at interviewing. It's not what they do full time. They not by day they're making games, and they you know, talking to people on the internet is a bit new to them, and so when you're being interviewed, you know, try and understand where the interviewer is coming from. You know, help them out, answer the questions, but try and figure out what they're getting at, and you know, try and understand the intention and where they're coming from, and speak to that rather than just answering specifically the question. Or a lot of people ramble for ages, which is quite annoying, and we don't tend to hire people that do that. So
don't do that.
Hopefully that helps.
Absolutely. And thank you for the offer of more specific help to those who are interested, because it is I suppose it's like you mentioned the film industry earlier. There's no necessarily one straight route into that. We have had, you know, an old boy who's an actor on here. It's very interesting listening to the different ways that works, and the different opportunities or lack of them that he's faced. And I guess there's some parallels there, because, as you say, the origin stories are all vary. It's different ways into it and different skill sets that marry on projects. So fascinating to hear about that. You mentioned something when we talked. Thinking back to your time at school, I can't believe it's already 4:30. I've just looked. That's what's thrown me. That's absolutely flown. It's over half an hour. Thinking back to your time at school, are there things that you might have wished you'd known then that you know now? Is you know, something you'd heard in assembly, or, you know, somebody from the future had said, "Oh, computers are going to be big. This is what you need to watch out." What sort of things might you go back and throw into the mix from 1990?
Yes. Well, I knew computers would be big, but I didn't necessarily know how to take advantage of that. Some people have become billionaires, and I haven't. But what I wish I'd known, or what someone told me, it's like a million things actually. I spent a lot of time studying in my 20s and 30s, and found out stuff. It's like, why didn't anyone tell me this? But you know, to pick one out, talk about, you know, advice, because on my, you know, quite chaotic journey and through the games industry, and even before that, I really didn't get either any advice or any good advice, because what I was doing was quite new, and none of the people I was talking to had any experience of games, and even software was not something which people had experienced. So, but the people you look to for advice, like, you know, your teachers and your parents, probably, they know what they've done, and they know that, I'm sure, very well. But if you're doing something different to that, they might not. So I tell you, the worst bit was in university. They had a dedicated careers lady. She was an older lady, like grey curly hair, probably in her early 60s, and I had my appointment with her, and I told her, you know, I think I'm going to, you know, apply for a job to make games. And she looked at me, she stood up, she grabbed me by the hand, looked in my eye and said, "Don't do games." And I just thought, why are we holding hands? That was the sum total of careers advice I got when I was at university. And
wow.
And things like, you know, you trust your parents because, you know, they look after you and so on, but when you, yeah, I figured out at some point there are limits to their knowledge, and again, particularly if you're doing something which is different to what they did. So my parents are doctors; they work in the NHS. Well, they worked in the NHS, retired now, and they very good doctors. But you know, early in my career, I did an annual appraisal, which I guess is a bit like a school report. You meet with your boss, and they tell you how well they think you're doing. And I said, "Oh, I've got my annual appraisal next week," and my parents said, "Oh, you should wear a suit." Being in the game should wear suits. The person doing my appraisal would probably be wearing a Portsmouth football shirt because he often wore a Portsmouth football shirt, and so their advice was utterly useless to me. So, realize that seek out good advice from people who have done what you want to do and listen to that, and then it's still useful and well-meaning coming from other people, but understand where they're coming from and how much value to place in the advice that they give you.
That's really, really helpful and really interesting. And it's one of the drivers for why we're doing this kind of thing, why we're doing this today, because as teachers, we know what we know, of course, and parents and the rest of it, as you say, but the world is changing. There are new industries that are birthing themselves and finding their way. And it's, that's great advice about advice. Is well-meaning advice from teachers can be generic, and parents and everybody else can be generic, but in newer fields or in fields where you do lack knowledge, I absolutely agree with you. It's get to talk to the experts and find out who's doing it and what they've learned, because I think that's the mistake some people make. They have preconceptions about what it is rather than finding out what it is, I think that's really, really good advice. My final question, which I've asked lots of people, if you could go back in time and whisper in young Iain's ear one piece of advice, what would you say to him that would help him in the future?
I think it was understand about how money works, because I wasn't that good at budgeting or controlling money that I was paid early in my career. And then the financial crisis came along, and my company had a share scheme, and I ended up losing a lot of money through that. And I didn't really understand what I was doing. And so as a result of that, I learned, I read a bunch of books like, how did this happen to me? Like, this is a problem, I'm going to solve this problem. And I, learned a bunch of stuff that, again, I wish I'd known about. That I always thought it was, very tedious. I didn't care about pensions or interest rates. And I thought that stuff was tremendously boring, but it's actually tremendously important. And even though it's boring or I wasn't interested in it, I need to understand that, because it does actually affect, the quality of life that you have. So yes, that would have helped me out a great deal if I'd known that sort of thing, but I know it now.
Yeah, you learn things the hard way, of course. We have a finance qualification that the boys can do at school now. That didn't exist back in the day.
Right.
It's
then
that the people who complete that get a head start on those kind of things. That's absolutely brilliant. Anything to add? Any final words? That's been really, the time is absolutely fun. It's been really insightful, and we're so grateful for you giving us your time today. Any final words for the boys and parents watching?
Yeah, sure. I've done something a bit different. Although there were a couple of other boys in my year who've got into the games industry as well, kind of independently. But these things are out there. You don't necessarily know what it is you can do, and there are some interesting opportunities out there. Because at school you have a bunch of choices, like you choose GCSEs, choose A-levels, but all those choices you're aware of what they are, and there's a finite number of them. But afterwards, there's infinite amount of choice, infinite amount of possibility, and if you go and find something you like, something you're interested in, there'll probably be something for you to do in that, and even you could create something new entirely on your own. I mean, the tools are there now that didn't exist back in 1998 on the internet to do your own research and find out about stuff. But don't feel like you're limited by what you know now. Go and find something that you enjoy. I've always tried to get into what I enjoy spending my time doing, and that's something you can do too.
And that's that's a great story. Thank you very much. I'd love to invite you to come and visit school if you're ever back in the Wakefield area at any point. Then please do call and see us. You'd be more than welcome. It'd be great to catch up again. And I may well see you in London in September. We were talking about that today. To September the 23rd for the Old Civilians London dinner. Okay. I think I've sat next to you at least once, maybe twice now, so I definitely hope to see you again at that. But thank you ever so much for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating and really insightful. So all the best, and take care, and catch up soon. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Really enjoyed it. All the best. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.